As you can see, this is the introduction, just the agenda. What we like is that we like to have it interactive. So that's why we really invite you to post your questions in the chat, so we can see what is a good and decent timing to work on it, to address it, and if not, of course, we can take that on later. Yeah, as mentioned also by Isaac, you can read that in the chat. He is our technical facilitator. Thank you. This session is recorded, and we will publish it afterwards. So if you feel that that is something that is, if you don't like to go public with your face, just feel free to hide yourself or just come up with another avatar that you like to share. But it's good to have you all in. As you can see, I'm sharing the agenda that we prepared. My name is Daan. I'm Daan Bergwerf. I'm in the team in the Netherlands and in Resilium. And I'm happy to introduce you to David Hatch. He is a chemical engineer, and I think many of you might know him already for process safety, integrity cards, and his deep knowledge and experience. So it's an honor to have you in here, David, today.
Thank you.
We in Resilium, we are currently with 10 people, where we have representation in the Netherlands, the UK team, someone in Portugal, and in the US, and we are currently really expanding also our partner network. Our mission in Resilium is to enable better decision making in risk. That's what we are here for. And today the topic is about analysis to assurance, where we will go through the basics, just a quick refresher of the bow tie, how do we do it, and then really in a process safety context. We see clients that they challenge us with the fact that they already have their risk studies, which is valuable, so how do they work together? What can we do? And David will address some of the elements that we can put in the mix. Also going further on practical applications, and we'll end up with our latest development, Risk Runner, which is a tool to systematically verify the presence of controls, and enabling us to go in where needed. And we'll end with a part which is really interactive with an open mic. So that's something that we're going to address. We also ask your attention for the Process Safety Community of Practice, which is an initiative here in the Netherlands to proactively learn and share. It's recommended for everybody in the field to register. We will also share a link where you can go in and register and see also what's taking place. And together with the Community of Practice, we are also preparing an event, a physical meeting event, later this year in October. Just to announce that. So it's all good to have you in. A very brief introduction, like who we are. You can see these people in a physical location, and they are playing a game. That's what we as Resilium are after. It is in the end about enabling better decision making and also engagement around risk. And what we see is that when we play these games with whether it is like higher management, middle management, or the operations and tax, it is about engaging and being able to think risk, think scenarios, and think controls. And it's something that we have to do together. It's just an illustration of how we do it. And also what we like to do is really work together with partners in the specific fields, so that we can tailor and answer the questions that you might have in your specific field. So enough said. this is us introducing David. David, I think it's time that you just take over the reins. Have fun, and I will actively check the chat and come up with maybe some elements or questions that are posed by the public.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for participating in this event. My name is David Hatch. As Dan mentioned, I'm a chemical and process engineer. I've spent nearly 40 years in high hazard industries. The last 10 have been embedded and embracing bow ties barrier management. And we want to share some ideas beyond the conventional static diagram, and hence the topic about analysis to assurance. Many of you as duty holders or owner operators will have hazard analyses or risk assessments, and how do you actually exploit those to make sure that you can demonstrate that you are still in control. And we're going to start with, some of you may have heard these questions before, but in 2005, December 2005, there was a major incident at a fuel storage facility in the UK in Buncefield. And following that, thankfully nobody was injured, but following that, there was a number of investigations by our regulator, the Health and Safety Executive. And as a result of that, they threw back a challenge to high hazard industries, because the potential for losing control of major hazards does not only affect the company themselves, but can affect the neighbouring population and the environment. So from a society point of view, there's an expectation that duty holders will, in simple terms, keep their chemicals in the pipe or keep their chemicals in the tanks. So the challenge was, from the boardroom down, companies need to ask themselves these three questions. So it's important that that challenge came from the top down, not from the bottom up. So it has to be led from the boardroom down, from senior management, in terms of understanding what can go wrong. So from a bow tie perspective, we would see these as hazards, threats and consequences, knowing what systems there are to prevent it from happening or to protect against this loss of control or containment. So we have prevention measures and mitigation and recovery measures. And the biggest challenge is having that ongoing assurance that they are actually working, looking at the demands on the barriers, whether they be planned demands from inspections or testing, or unplanned demands from an incident or a near miss. And having that confidence, that evidence that the barriers are actually present and they are actually operating and performing. This presentation follows on from an earlier presentation as part of the community of practice that Dan mentioned, where the basic concepts of bow ties were introduced. I'm going to refresh those. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, and what we're going to share with you is very much about what can be done rather than how it's done. So we can only cover so many topics in 30-40 minutes, but we welcome any questions that you have. So at the heart of the bow tie is the hazard. The hazard is what makes you money. You are handling flammable, toxic, corrosive, sometimes explosive materials, and that handling, that processing, that storage, that transportation is how you make money. If you didn't want to have those hazards, you would, the first sort of line of defense is elimination. You would get rid of them, but you have them because you make money. You know, if you've got any sort of fuels have the potential to burn, and that's their nature. So the key thing here is that you stay in control of those hazards. Where you lose control, at the point of losing control is the top event, which can going from left to right lead to unintended consequences. These have negative impacts on people, on the environment, on your equipment, on your revenue. They, in turn, are caused by one or more threats, things that initiate that loss of control, that loss of containment, sometimes that loss of separation. You may recognize them as causes. You may see the consequences as effects. But we have this visual representation of a scenario where one or more threats converge on this loss of control, this loss of containment, which then has multiple outcomes: human, environmental, reputational, etc. And we have in place prevention measures that stop the threats leading to the top event. We have mitigation measures that the point where you lose control is not necessarily the point where you start to experience the impact. So in Buncefield, the loss of containment was the overfill of the tank. That wasn't the point where you actually had the damage. You had to find an ignition source, and it had to, find the correct combustion conditions. So there is the opportunity in many cases between the top event and the consequence to mitigate or recover this escalation from left to right. So either the outcomes are less severe or less likely. Each of these barriers, these prevention mitigation barriers, are imperfect. They are not indestructible, and they have their own challenges. You may imagine them in terms of Swiss cheese slices, where you've got a number of holes in the Swiss cheese slices. These are created or enlarged by degradation factors, but we control the degradation of the barriers through our management systems, through our maintenance management system, competence management system, document management system, change management system. So what the Bowtie does is it brings together these scenarios to allow us to see the criticality and the context of the barriers, because it's the barriers and the integrity of the barriers that are giving you that ongoing asset integrity, that are sustaining that containment. If we start with this simple Buncefield example, I'm using a storage tank because many of you will have storage tanks, whether it's flammable, toxic, even a storage tank full of water could, under certain circumstances, be hazardous if you have Legionella in it, for example. And it's relatively easy to understand. In this case, we have a flammable liquid in a tank, and we have some instrumentation. We have measurement through the level gauge. We have overfill protection here, and we analyze that. Historically, we've been analyzing these sort of scenarios for over 50 years with HAZOP, or process hazard analysis. So the conventional HAZOP approach, where you've got a worksheet or a spreadsheet or a tool where you've got systematic challenges through these deviations, through these no flow, more flow, less flow, etc., escalating towards where you explore causes, consequences, safeguards. That can all be replicated, represented, communicated through a Bowtie. So you've got your possible causes become threats, your consequences are indeed consequences, safeguards are prevention recovery barriers or prevention mitigation barriers. And you can see here that all the information you have in your existing worksheet isn't lost. You're not losing that when you transpose that into Bowtie. You're actually gaining wisdom, you're getting insight. You particularly when it comes to the barriers, you're actually seeing where the barrier is actually making its contribution, because it may not necessarily apply to every threat or every consequence. So a conventional PHA HAZOP worksheet might look like this, where we've got a number of deviations. You might have up to 20 different deviations covering flow, pressure, temperature, level, etc. You may have a number of different causes, and here you've got potential consequences. So that should be relatively familiar to most people. The challenge then comes because historically we've always just had a single column for the safeguards. So here we've got our safeguards listed, and it can become quite a long list. In reality, the ones that are highlighted in yellow actually belong to the cause, and the ones that are in white belong to the consequence. And that simple division of prevention versus mitigation can actually be done in HAZOP worksheets. It just hasn't really been adopted by industry. But doing this in a bow tie allows us to get much more clarity on the scenario, to understand the paths that go through the point where we lose control or where we lose containment. So what that would look like in a bow tie scenario is where we've got our causes over here on the left, we've got our prevention safeguards or prevention barriers here, we've got our consequences on the right hand side, some of which are human, some of which are environmental. Any flammable liquid may just create a pool fire, it may create an explosion. So different outcomes have different mitigation measures. So for example, if you have a pool fire, then maybe the firefighting system would be a good mitigation measure. But if you've got a vapor cloud explosion, the firefighting system is probably too slow and too inadequate. The other thing we'll see in our HAZOP PHA worksheets is typically there'll be some kind of risk ranking or risk matrix. Sometimes it's before the safeguard, sometimes it's after the safeguard, sometimes it's even after the recommendations. So these, again, should be familiar to you in terms of their implementation. But in reality, what these are doing is it's indicating where we are making risk reduction contributions based on the quality and the quantity of the barriers, how many barriers we have, and how capable, how effective they actually are. So we can do this for a bow tie as well. So here we can see we've got threat likelihoods or cause likelihoods here. We've got barrier effectivenesses or performance criteria. We've got consequence severities. And that overall gives us some insight into the unmitigated and mitigated risks. So the unmitigated, if we had no barriers, which is notionally inconceivable, and the mitigated where we do have barriers. So as a tool, it's very effective. And again, all the functionality that you have in a HAZOP worksheet is that can be implemented in a relatively simple bow tie. For many years now, functional safety has been very prominent, an expectation that our safety instrumented functions and our safety instrumented systems are properly implemented and managed. The functional safety standards 61511 for the process include a number of different methods for determining the safety integrity level of your functions. What you see on the screen is the risk graph. Tends to be more popular in Europe than it does in the US. But again, it's a means to determine the risk and the risk reduction requirements. So in simple terms, we've got a multi-dimensional matrix here where you've got your consequence severity down this axis. Then these two components here, exposure and avoidance, are directing you to up or down this diagram here to give you a sense of risk reduction. So this W1, W2, W3 is essentially likelihood, roughly. So this W3 is the highest likelihood, this is the lowest likelihood. So where you have the highest severity, the highest exposure, the lowest avoidance, and the greatest likelihood, you're going to get the highest risk reduction requirement. There's a move, again, it's a slow movement sometimes, particularly for some jurisdictions. There's a move now to go to layer protection analysis, a much more quantified approach, and particularly after Buncefield, there was a lot of layer protection analysis done on storage tanks, some of which were done quite badly, and the UK Health and Safety Executive did some research on that, and we can provide you the links to that. But what that layer protection analysis does is give you much more clarity on the elements within that risk assessment. So you'll see here, the first aspect is that the demand rate, W, is not the same as the initiating event frequency. So in your demand rate, you've got to take on board all the measures that you've got before you actually place a demand on your safety instrumented function. But that's going to be completely different to what your initiating event or your threat frequency is. There's also a lack of clarity and sensitivity on your exposure and avoidance. It tends to be black and white. It's either you're exposed or you're not exposed, or it's avoidable or not avoidable. And it's very difficult to get that fine line between what's our real exposure, our real avoidance, rather than this order of magnitude contribution. One of the big challenges about your risk graph is it's just giving you a safety integrity level number 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't actually give you a target probability of failure on demand. So within that ranking or that gradient, you've got a range of probability of failure on demand. So even though you've got a safety integrity level requirement of 2, they can vary, worst case, by a factor of 10. So the risk graph doesn't give you that, whereas the LOPA does give you that risk reduction requirement. And one of the interesting facts is, if you actually dive deep into the risk graph, and this publication here from the ICME in the UK has done such an analysis, that the maths in a typical risk graph is non-linear. So you can actually find, if you go down what appears to be the same path, because of the avoidance and exposure, you end up with completely different safety integrity level requirements. If anybody wants to know more about that, I recommend that you read that book or get in touch with us. But it's an interesting fact that there are some scenarios where you can get potentially the wrong target because you've gone down what appears to be a sensible path. Taking that layer of protection analysis forward, this is an example here from our tank overfill. We've got a target target event likelihood of 10 to minus 5 per year. We've got a number of conditional modifiers, which are actually mitigation barriers. We've got our threat or our initiating event. So we're breaking down our scenarios into its component, attributing some numbers to it to give us a target risk reduction factor, and if necessary, a target safety integrity level. That can all be built in again into the bow tie. So what we're doing with the bow tie is building a scenario skeleton and then adding layers of metadata, whether it be qualitative, likelihood, severity, effectiveness, or actual frequencies and probabilities to give us much more insight into the sense and sensitivity of our analysis. So we tend to make predictions based on other people's data. Unless we are really diligent and disciplined to actually acquire and analyze the data, we're making judgments based on generic data in terms of how often do we expect to overfill the wrong tank, or how often do we expect our ignition controls to fail. So it's really important that we localize this to get actual evidence data that is relevant to our activities, because it depends on the age of the facility, it depends sometimes on the age of the workforce, it depends on the environment. You know, is it aggressive, is it cold, is it too hot, etc. So all you can do with your layer protection analysis is make a prediction of what may happen, how often it's likely to happen, and is that acceptable or not? Do we need to do more? We attribute our barriers with a probability of failure or success to get these layer protection analysis calculations to work. But the probability of success, shall we say, or failure depends on a number of different aspects of it. Is it fit for purpose? Is it fit for service? How well do we actually understand how it works? How well do we look after it? And my colleague Paul in Resilium UK has done a really interesting article on how we actually should measure barrier health rather than a quite crude approach to it. So once we've built our prediction of how we anticipate our tank overfill performing, for example, we've got our barrier demands. We're actually learning from our experience. Sometimes we learn from others' experience, but ideally we want to make it more localized. So planned demands are when we conduct audits on our barriers, and they may be during operations or they may be during maintenance, for example, inspections, proof testing. Unplanned demands are where we're not expecting the barrier to be called to act. So where you've got incidents or accidents, and depending on your terminology, whether it's called a near miss, a near hit, a close call, a dangerous occurrence, all these, even if they don't get to the point where you've actually injured someone or damaged the environment, all these are learning opportunities. Even if you get to the first barrier and the first barrier stops that escalation, that's a learning opportunity, because that has then given you a piece of data. That's given you some data as that the initiating threat has occurred, and B, what did the first barrier do? Did it work? Did it not work? So again, visualizing this, adding this metadata layer to enhance our core skeleton of the scenario. Here we're representing our planned demands on the diagram. So here you can see, I realize it's a bit busy, but here we've got a number of questions for this high level trip. Is our maintenance up to date? Is it disabled? Is proof testing up to date? Did it pass its proof testing? Have we had any significant defects in the past year? Depending on the answers to those questions, they are either positive or negative. Positive is green, negative is red. So you can see immediately where you've got areas of vulnerability. Perhaps here you've got high levels of confidence that your control of ignition sources is sound because it tends to be more green. Or perhaps here your separation of people from the tanks is pretty poor. You're not exercising proper security measures or whatever. People are getting too close to the tanks too often. That gives you some insight of your leading measures, how well you're actually managing your barriers. The flip side, where you've got unplanned demands, is, God forbid, you've actually had that loss of containment, you've had that loss of control, you've actually got to the point where there has been a pool fire or you have had a spillage in the river. Again, each of these is a learning opportunity, because to get to the point where you've had a fire, the barriers have not performed the way that you predicted they would perform. Either the barriers are missing, or they're there but didn't work, or they worked but they weren't big enough, fast enough, strong enough, or perhaps they worked this time but you were lucky, or indeed sometimes they're actually effective. So learning from that barrier performance is really critical, rather than just say, oh, the barrier failed. Did it fail because it was disabled? Did it fail because it wasn't the right size, etc.? So now when we start to see where we actually are, so where we've got our actual barrier performance, where we've actually got our initiating event or our threat frequencies, we're making predictions that might happen once in 20 years, but in the last 5 years, we've had this threat occurring 3 times. So our predictions are obviously incorrect. Again, what the model allows us to do is to superimpose a second set of calculations of what's our actual risk scenario. So here we made a prediction that we were going to fill a tank once a week, but now we might double that production. We may have demands that we want to fill a tank twice a week. So that's going to increase our potential initiating event frequency. We're assuming generically that our operators make a mistake 1 time in 10, but we find that perhaps they're overworked, they're distracted, they're fatigued, they're actually failing 3 times out of 10. So what do these little increments actually mean for our risk position? So overall, increased threat frequency, reduced barrier effectiveness may actually give us a residual risk that's not as acceptable as we had initially anticipated, and then therefore we've got to make adjustments. We've either got to bring the original barriers up to their intended performance level, ideally eliminate the threats or reduce the threat frequency, or perhaps we've got to supplement the barriers with better ones or additional ones. So the topic of revalidation is really key. This is for Europe, and in the UK it's called COMA, but for Europe it's SEVESO. So there's an expectation that you can't just assume that you will always be safe. You've got this ongoing vigilance to make sure that your scenarios are properly understood, that you've got the necessary measures in place, and that they stay in place, that performance, that presence is always there. At the very least, there's an expectation you'll do it every 5 years, but if you have an accident or a near miss, or there's some other significant change in your technical or organizational structure, then there's an expectation that you will conduct some revalidation. And having the bow tie representation of your potential hazards gives you much more flexibility, gives you much more power to carry out that revalidation. So historically what we've had is we've got a HAZOP, which is very node or subsystem focused. So here we're looking at a particular node here, which is the inlet to a distillation column. And for that inlet, you go through 20 possibly deviations to deep dive into what can go wrong. Whereas if you look at the unit operation, you look at the distillation system and look at it from a system perspective and focus on the loss of containment, you've got a much more efficient, effective way of revalidating your hazard analyses. Moving forward, as Dan mentioned at the start of the introduction, Resilium, we're really keen that risks are understandable. If you don't understand them, how can you manage it? So what we're aiming to do with a number of existing and future products is, dare I say, to make it a bit more fun, but to make it much more accessible to technical and non-technical people alike. So we want to utilize board games and card games to really communicate the key scenarios where you expect your stakeholders to contribute, whether it be on an operational level or a commercial level. And this is an example of one of our board games. This is essentially a version of Buncefield, where you've got a loss of primary containment at the heart of it. We've got a number of different threats or initiating events. We've got several outcomes or consequences, and in between we've got different types of barriers. Some are human barriers, some are hardware barriers. Each of these has their strengths and weaknesses. Each of these has their own level of performance. And the game is about utilizing your budget wisely. How do you spread your limited funds across your assets to make sure that you can actually stay in control? And it's a really exciting opportunity for leadership or for frontline personnel or anyone who's got some sort of interest or role in it to really understand that there are decisions that you can make, usually influenced by money, that can have a serious impact because you've perhaps not fully understood the context of your protection. And the game's a really neat way to get people on board. And these can be customized. We've got one for working at height for what you might call conventional occupational safety. This is loss of containment of a flammable liquid. We can customize this to match your actual bow ties. We can customize it to suit your language. And it's a great opportunity that's getting a lot of traction within our clients. So I'm going to stop there, and Dan is going to talk about another exciting opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, David. We got some questions, so maybe you can just keep your material up. But first of all, we saw just a post position. Well, like, hey, as much barriers there are, then we are the safer we are. I think that's how we how I can summarize this statement, and that is also not always true. I think it is just in general is, of course, how do we influence our risk is by having these barriers or these controls, safeguards, and by knowing how strong they are. There is a difference between how if everything works well, not everything is as effective as possibly can be. That's what, especially in process environments, LOPA illustrates really well. What's the relative strength or the probability of failure, and then what is the likelihood that we will also experience a loss of containment or a loss of control, or even possibly the consequences. So that's why it's really useful. Yeah, and David, can you enlarge a bit on indeed this slide? How do we see the differences between the red and the greens come to life? Is it cumulative? Cumulative, yeah.
So in this case, you're accumulating what we call surveys. So for here, this is basically saying there are 4 surveys were carried out, and of those 4 surveys, the cumulative effect is that, let's just say, 3 had a negative answer and 1 had a positive answer, for example. So it's within the tool you can do some neat stuff where you can select a period. What did it look like over a period, or what does it look like over all time? The barrier progress or regress, Dan's going to cover, because we've got some really clever ideas how that's going to happen. Conceivably, it's possible to do it in Bowtie XP, but I think we would probably take that out and put it into Power BI to give you that sort of a trajectory of it. I don't know if that makes sense to answer your question.
Yeah, let us know. I see some notes that we have some audio issues. Please.
The next question about process safety versus tiers. So I'm thinking the process safety versus tiers. The tiers, I'm assuming, refer to the API CCPS process safety sort of indicators, where tier 1 is a major loss of containment, tier 2 is a moderate loss of containment. I'll be honest, I've forgotten what tier 3 is. Tier 4, I think, is a demand on a safety system. Is that what you're referring to as tiers, or are you asking about tiers with respect to COMA or Cerveza? You want to elaborate on what process safety versus tiers mean?
Yeah. So in the meantime, yeah, feel free to unmute yourself or just type it in the chat. That's something that we can indeed indicate. So I think that
you've got a question.
Yeah,
Mohammed has a question.
Okay. Yes, and thank you for your presentation. Actually, I have a question. I think in most cases, interaction of threat and risk and causes lead to catastrophic consequences. Actually, I know that there are some methods such as Bayesian networks can handle these types of issue. However, I want to know that is there any other method that can resolve this problem?
Are you talking about the Bayesian aspect of barrier performance?
Yes, interaction of events. I mean, correlation, interaction of different events and threats and risk causes.
I know there's been research done on Bayesian modeling. It's not my area of expertise. I think, if I'm being brutally honest with you, I think that falls into the same camp as artificial intelligence, in that we as an industry still can't get the basics right. So why should we get distracted with why should we start to move on to more advanced techniques, because the data just isn't there? Any AI system has to learn from some source, and the sources are very poor or incomplete or not representative. So again, my thought was, you're making a prediction based on genetic data. To get statistically significant data takes a lot of time and money and talent to acquire it, and but it is a valid approach, because life tends not to be linear. But it still has to have a sound basis, a sound mathematical basis. Don't know if any of the other Resilium guys have looked into Bayesian. Alistair, I think you might have.
Well, not so much Bayesian, but what I was going to say, I think you can summarize what you've just said, David, is data quality. And the problem is, I've witnessed this a lot, is we are rarely doing what we said we would do. Therefore, you can't claim the data that you've got is exactly that process, because people cut corners, there are deviations, the equipment wasn't built to spec, we've got concessions, waivers, all sorts of things in there. And that's the fundamental bit, is that the AI, the artificial intelligence, doesn't know you've done that unless you've taught it that. And therein, that's the real problem, I think, with the AI. I think what AI can do is a lot of the heavy stats that we find tricky. But I come back to, if you're going to do that, you need really good quality data. And David alluded to in fact, said it explicitly. You need to rationalize your data versus the lookup tables, because you design your system. You've got a perfect box, and you've pressure tested it. You put it in a heat tank. You vibrated it to death, and then you don't put it in that environment. You put it in a salt bath, and you wonder why it corrodes in a year. And it's all of those things that you have to have data that is really yours to start to have clever analytics, I think. And the rest of the time, what I like about the stuff that David was showing is it's causing me to go, hang on, I've got some greens, some reds. Why? Look at that bit. And I think that's the state we're at the minute, is what I want is an indicator that says, look over here, look at me, I'm the problem child. And then people can get involved, and then you can start to apply intelligence, human intelligence, to go, oh yeah, the spec said that's not for a saline environment, and that's where we are. So, it's all about those sort of common sense things that we don't do properly, consistently don't do properly, as evidenced by accidents of the same nature.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, so briefly introducing also the reason, I think this also indicates why we as Resilium last year we launched Risk Runner. And it is about being able to verify, are these controls, it's the third question. So the first two questions is about understanding our scenarios and our controls. But the third question is about, okay, will they work today? Are we able to verify that this mix of controls that we have, that they that do we have sufficient information to be able to say yes, we are in a good state, or we should act before. And we saw that is a challenge. And there was a question what was possible within Bowtie XP. And that is, of course, a tool that can help you analyze it to very solid depth. That's both on the LOPA exercise, but also the audit function with the green and red indicators that were discussed. But the challenge is that we see is that you need to do this systematic revalidation or just reviews, and that's the heart of what Risk Runner is after. So part of it is that this is what you like to, of course, preview, that when, especially with management or when we have just pressure on the organization, that you start to have like a eluded system or just a false sense of where we are. And that's why we need to be able to say, okay, well, but we know where our performance of our controls or barriers is great or not so great, and that's where we can act in time. So underneath, we serve multiple models. So we just call it like the progressive risk model. And whether we start with a more like a register approach, we can upgrade those to Bowtie, and we even consider that we have like more advanced modeling in future. But this is under the hood. I'm not going to bother you too much with that, but I think it's powerful to see that both all of the models, they have its merit. They have their good sides, but also their limitations. But I think the end is about, and we call it critical control performance or measurement, is that whether we have identified it in study 1 or 2, we need to be able to verify what is the performance of a control. And whether you do this by auditing or systematic verification, or you already have data somewhere, we need to be able to verify whether this control is performing. And that is what Risk Runner is offering, so that you are able to just can track whether this control is just going, are we going in the right direction, or should we act before? And this is what we are after with Risk Runner. So if you'd like to learn more about that, we can of course take you into some deeper details. But it is in the end about being able to act, but also improve whether we see that we have difficulties with the performance of some of the controls. Is there anything else that might pop up, or is something that you like to discuss? Yeah, Risk Runner is an online tool. Yeah, it's browser based, and it is really designed to be all around the. It's designed to facilitate. First of all, us like the analysts or the risk gurus, but also being able to have the control or barrier owners or risk owners that they are just able to systematically verify and check whether these controls are working, yes or no, or notify on deviations or improvements, so that we are also systematically improving it. Yeah, it's an online tool. Any more questions? Yeah, we've got an interface, for example, also with Bowtie XP, but the main mission of Risk Corner is what you see on the page at the moment. We've got some time left still, so please keep it coming. We like to have this interactivity.
I think it's important to emphasize again the theme of this is this ongoing assurance, is answering the third Buncefield question, is that you can't be complacent about your barriers. In many cases, and I say this as a former process design engineer, many facilities are operated beyond their design life. Many protection measures are operated beyond their design capability, and sometimes you don't know that because you've inherited or you've acquired a facility and the documentation is incomplete or missing or whatever, and you have to do the best you can, and sometimes you have to refer to generic data from other sources. But what Dan's illustrating through Risk Runner is, for an individual barrier, you're seeing its individual trajectory, or is it going up or going down? But because that's part of an integrated database, you get to see the bigger picture. What is the contribution that degradation is making, whether it's an environmental degradation or whether it's because of badly managed changes, or lack of maintenance, etc. So we're really keen, and I think Alistair sort of emphasised this. We're not even doing the basics. We're not looking after the things that we rely on to sustain that integrity, that containment integrity.
I think that's a really solid point, David, because I think it's not that we are bad people for not doing the basics. We're just busy. We've got lots to do. And that business about the life cycle and the length of an asset. So I'm a mechanical engineer, worked in military aviation, equipment design, maintenance and operation at various points. And the lifespan of some of my pieces of equipment was design life of 4,000 flying hours, and they actually saw 12,000 flying hours. If you look at the American B-52, the Flying Fortress, it was a 25-year lived aircraft, and the expectation is that the airframe will see 100 years because it's so low fatigue, the operation. But no one predicted that in 1940, whenever they started designing it. They planned it for that much, and it's going to do that much. And all the assumptions that were made are probably gone out the window. Now, in aviation, they write everything down. So a lot of that will have been looked at and assessed, but it's about, do you have that information? And importantly, we sort of joke about this in that actually building the bow tie is the easy bit. I can look at a thing, and we're all quite good as engineers. We can pick apart how a thing works, and we can build the bow tie. The tricky job is actually, as David says, saying, how well is that barrier performing? And particularly today, can I do what I want to do? Because nothing works. And I don't want to scare any of you, but you've never been on an aeroplane that works 100%. They've all got faults and little failures. And that's the way our systems work. And it's about understanding at what point do I have to say, no, I can't fly that anymore. I can't operate that plant. I should stop and take these bits apart and maintain it and put it back to where I know it is good enough. And that's the world we live in. And I think the real problem, and a couple of the questions we're picking up on it, is how do you actually monitor the performance piece? Well, as David says, Paul's written a really interesting paper and approach to that. But actually, what you've got to do is understand, where do I need to look today? And that's where the Bowtie helps. But it's just the start of the journey. The real problem is now using the Bowties to have an effect. You shouldn't be making the diagram and then just sticking it on the wall and letting dust gather. It needs to be something that you use as a reference, as a point to go, where's our problem today? What do I know? What do I understand? What makes me nervous? And I think that's the power. And what we love about Risk Runner is we're looking at it from the user end to go, what information will they need? So the Bowtie's kind of in the background now. It's actually information that I need to do things now. Thanks, Dan. Is that Paul's article you just posted? Or David's just posted?
David. Yeah, exactly. And there are two things that come to my mind as well. I think it is about engaging management on the things that matter. That is just sometimes difficult, and I think we all see and understand that sometimes we as engineer or experts, we have. We've got the information and the knowledge, but it is about, okay, well, how do we also just really work on a team to provide the means in time, or to make these decisions, as Alistair indicates. We should improve, or we should stop in time. And that in the end is also like just good business. And the other element, we were discussing it a little bit, like AI. In Risk Runner, we are also just, at the moment, we are considering it, we've got some functionality in terms of AI, but I think there's quite a good merit to what David states, that you have to have your data right, and there are, I think, in the end, there will be opportunities where we can also use data from industry best practices, etc. But yeah, that is a work in progress, and might even be a topic for a future webinar, where we explore what are some good cases where we can learn from, also as a community. So if you have any suggestions, please keep it coming. I think we're reaching the end of this hour. I hope it was informative and constructive. If you have any other questions, please, of course, keep them coming. My outro would be that we invite you again to also register for the community of practice. And if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing with whether it is on games or Bowtie analysis or with Risk Runner, yeah, we would be very pleased to spend some time and go into some of the motions that you might be facing, and then we can define what might be also good for your organization. So for now, we really like to thank you for your time. Look forward to connect, whether it is in this community of practice on LinkedIn or directly. You know how to find us, and yeah, we really like to help you enable you to make optimal decisions on risk and communicate it throughout the organization. That's what we're after. Thanks a lot.
Cheers all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.